We now return to our Inara Commander series with Mack Winston, Season 2, Episode 6, Uncomfortable Truths.
Where's Aiden?
Thompson? Sorry, he didn't make it.
And...
Sorry, she's dead too. When we dropped, you were all thrown around like rag dolls in a hurricane. The time had come to break the bad news to our remaining guests. Expecting to be shot by Thompson, I had taken the somewhat unorthodox measure of shutting down the main power during hyperspace transit. The violence of our hyperspace exit had surprised even me. It had been a great deal more unpleasant for our 4 uninvited guests, who had been attached to our flight deck with nothing more than their magnetic boots. 2 of them had died, their ringleader, Thompson, and one of his colleagues, Mate Thomas, as they had been violently thrown around the flight deck during our uncontrolled hyperspace exit. The other 2, Kate Svenson, a serious-looking woman in late middle age, and a young man named Kevin Archer, had survived with some bruises and a minor concussion. Cal and I, safely restrained in our flight seats, were none the worse for wear, apart from a slightly sore back. Unfortunately, the violence of the exit had also seriously damaged our frameshift drive, and we weren't going anywhere fast. With main power up, we had enough fuel to keep life support and basic systems online for a couple of weeks, perhaps 3. The star scan showed that we were 3 light years from LTT 1347. There was no possibility of rescue. We either got the frameshift drive working, or we would freeze to death once the fuel ran out. Our ship, now our tomb, would likely never be found. I'm afraid that's not all, I began, looking at Svenson and Archer, both laid out on the benches in the transport module. The frameshift drive took quite a bit of damage, so we're dead in the water. We're looking at repairs, but neither of us are engineers, so we've got a bit of work ahead of us. Svenson narrowed her eyes.
We're all going to pay for your recklessness now,
she said acidly. I hope I don't need to remind you that your colleague looked like he was going to shoot one of us, I remarked, trying to sound casual. So I don't think I had many options if I didn't want to be bleeding to death all over the flight deck. Svenson seemed to be fighting some internal battle.
You might be lucky it was him and Thompson who died, not me.
Why?
Before becoming an administrator for the aristocrats of LP 771-72, I was Schultz Enterprise Chief Engineer.
So you'll help us fix the FSD? Svenson drew a long breath.
I really don't know. After what we've been through, I'm not too sure I can be bothered. With Thompson dead...
Mr. Archer,
Cal began suddenly.
How's life at home?
Archer looked slightly startled at the sudden interjection.
Fine. My wife's expecting a new baby and...
Cal's gaze swept back to Svenson. He didn't say anything. He looked back towards Archer.
Looking forward to being a new dad.
Well, of course, but...
I'm sure Mr. Archer here wants to get home. We might be enemies, Miss Svenson, but right now your colleague could do with getting home. We have a common enemy. The icy wastes of interstellar space, and together we can overcome it. Or we could sit here for 2 more weeks, and then Mack and I will smoke so much onion head that we can't feel anything anymore, while you 2 experience in full how it feels to slowly freeze to death.
He's right, you know, I said, folding my arms and staring into Svenson's eyes. She scowled back. I drifted, weightless, through the cabin, and, taking a chance, released Svenson from her restraints. Let's go to the engine room and get this old crate on the move, eh? Svenson grunted assent, or at least I assumed it to be assent. A few minutes later, we were in the William F. McCoy's engine room. The main power plant was making its reassuring muffled roar, but beside it was the very silent and dead frameshift drive. The inspection panel I had removed earlier was still off. Svenson stuck her head inside while Cal and I looked on.
Give me a light,
came her voice. I handed her the torch on my belt. More of her body disappeared into the bowels of the machine. Some clanking noises. After what seemed like an eternity, she slid herself out of the inspection hatch. Well, what do you reckon?
We can weld the coolant jacket. Got a welder?
Yeah, our tool cubicle is pretty well equipped.
The bigger problem is the stellar radar. It's distorted. Your FSD's firmware probably has a simulator that will help us reshape it, but we're going to have to improvise something to hold it in place, or it'll just distort again. One of you will have to go to the flight deck and start it up.
I nodded to Cal, who pushed himself away towards the exit.
I think you got pretty lucky. If that thing had sheared, well...
Her voice drifted off as she imagined the catastrophe. Svenson watched Cal exit the bay and the door close behind him. She gave me a penetrating stare, her dark eyes seeming to bore into mine.
You're not like him,
she said suddenly. Eh?
I mean, you're not Imperial.
No, I grew up on Azaban in Eranin. I wasn't sure what my family history had to do with any of this, but I felt that it would be best to humor Svenson.
Are you his slave?
I wasn't anticipating that as a question. Hell no, I replied, not knowing whether to laugh at the suggestion.
So what are you doing here? With the East India Company, and with a true blue Imperial from Aknar?
I shrugged. Only place I seem to fit in, I said, remembering how the Federation had treated me, then what the LHS 331 Values Party in the Alliance had done. And besides, my mother was from Akanar.
I see. And your father from Eranin?
No, Fekta. He just settled on Azaban when things got a bit hot. I didn't really know him. He was taken when I was very small.
So you're here to be close to your mother then?
No, she died long ago, so I never knew her either. Why don't I just get the welding kit? Perhaps Svenson was trying to guilt-trip me about the whole sorry mess in LP 77172. All I knew is that we had gone to war with the aristocrats, and it was my duty to help in the war effort. I wasn't involved in the politics of it all, but I also hadn't forgotten how I'd been treated by the aristocrats on Vernadsky platform a few months earlier. Nor, I suspect, had the other EIC pilots who'd been beaten by an ugly man with a metal bar that night. I rooted around in the tool cubicle until I found the welder and its supplies. The thing was pristine. We'd never had to make an in-flight repair, and neither Cal nor I were experts in this kind of thing, to say the least. Any problems, we just hoped the auto-reboot repair would take care of it, or it would be something simple. I returned, wondering what the next line of Svenson's interrogation would be.
Thompson was serious, you know.
She continued, her voice coming from the inspection hatch as she disappeared back inside with the welder.
We have good evidence that the EIC had infiltrated us and fomented this war deliberately. We were a peaceful, democratic party.
I don't move at those exalted levels, I said, cutting her off. And besides, I don't want to offend, but your own party has been keeping things from you.
What do you mean?
She said, suddenly pulling herself out from the inspection hatch. Well, I began, I don't just do haulage for the EIC. I'm also contracted to run security patrols. Around the mining sites, that kind of thing. I have another ship fitted out for the job. Mostly I'm assigned to Kappa Pharnacis, but sometimes I get assigned to LP 77172, so I get to see what goes on in the mining sites there.
Your point being?
My point is that nearly all of the bad guys harassing miners in LP 77172 trace back to the aristocrats. Sure, there's the odd EIC pilot turned bad there too, but nearly every single criminal in those res sites has been one of your guys. Which doesn't strike me as either peaceful nor democratic.
We can't control everyone.
No, sure. But the scale of the problem was such that these guys had official backing. It wasn't just a few random bad guys associated with the aristocrats. Ever been to Vernadsky platform?
Schultz was my home.
Well, I have. I did nothing more than turn in there for a night, buying some space in the hostel on the platform, when one of your guys comes along and beats me with an iron bar. I wasn't the only one either. The whole place was a den of criminality.
This never went on at Schultz.
Maybe not, but to paint the aristocrats as a peaceful democratic party, complete with rainbow-farting unicorns, is quite a long way from the truth. And to call the EIC the bad guys when we defended you against the Federation just 4 months ago perhaps says that we might not be the villains you're accusing us of being. Svenson was silenced. I was hoping she wasn't reconsidering fixing the drive. Look, let's not dwell on this now. We've got a job to do, and as Cal said before we started, we have a common enemy right now, and we've got to work together. You can go back to hating us when you safely arrive in LTT 1349. I'd also suggest you forget any ideas of some sort of whistleblowing or complaints of some kind of conspiracy. We get home, we go our separate ways, Archer gets to see his new baby, and we all just live happily ever after. A good plan, no? Svenson sighed and disappeared back into the hatch with the welder and set it up to make the repair. We continued to work, wordlessly, apart from the odd instruction, hold this here, no here, like this, a little bit up, down, and finally requesting Cal to start the FSD simulation so the Stellarator could be put right. I privately wondered what the East India Company had been doing behind the scenes. I rather suspected Svenson was onto something, but at the same time, I didn't think we tended to do things unprovoked. Either way, I'd probably never find out.